The Ableton warp modes are a very powerful sound design tool which are often overlooked. They allow you to take something like a vocal and with just a few effects create something like this. So today let's have a look at them. There's 6 different warp modes which each has their own functionality and their own quirks. The first one is the beat modes, which tries to maintain the transient, which means that it's best used for stuff like drums. You have the tones, which is a very simple granular algorithm. Setting the grain size carefully allows you to tune the grain size to the key of the track. We also have the texture one, which is a little bit more complex. You have repitch, which is a little bit different than your standard warp modes in that it does not maintain the pitch information of a sound. Instead, it allows you to warp the sound and it will just change the pitch to whatever it needs to be to actually match the warping that you're doing. And then you have the complex and the complex pro modes, which as the name suggests are a little bit more complex. And I found that these work on more complex materials such as vocals or real-life instruments. And mainly the Complex Pro is really good for that because it allows you to maintain the formants, which obviously if you're repitching vocals is very, very important. Now, first of all, I do have to say that when it comes to warping, there's never a free lunch in the sense that you're always going to lose some quality when warping. Today though, we're mainly going to be focusing on the sound design aspects, and oftentimes that is actually what you want, that loss in quality. Just make sure that you're aware of that and that you don't use excessive warping if you don't need to. Now before we get into the sound design part, let's start with some simple uses for it when you would use it normally. Say for example that we have this drum loop over here. As you can probably hear, it has some issues because it's not aligned to our kick drum and not aligned to the tempo of our track. So if we just warp this, and for this one, because this is drums, let's keep it in beats mode over here. We can just align it to the length of the track, like this, and now it will sound much nicer. We actually get the kind of groove that we want to have now. Another thing that the warp modes allow you to do is put different parts of a vocal into place. So what we did before is we just warped it into place, but we didn't really affect any of the individual parts of the sample. We just made the loop a little bit shorter. In this case, we have a vocal over here.
Don't stop it.
What we can do is we can take individual parts of this vocal over here and we can move those around. So just by double clicking over here, you create a point. You can already see that there are some points where it suggests you to make a point. These are the transients that it detects. So these will be the start of sounds that you can move around. And usually you can just grab these and move them around as well. And as you can see, the waveform is actually adapting to this. But in this case, what we can do is we can say, for example, we want this part of the vocal to start exactly on the offbeat over here. We want this to maybe start over here. We want this to start on this beat over here. And we want this to start on the beat as well. And now it will be much more aligned with the track that we have.
Don't stop it. Don't stop it.
Now let's have some look at some more creative uses of the warping. What I'm just going to do is I'm going to turn off the warping over here so that it actually resets over here, and then turning it on and setting yes over here allows you to redo the warping, all of it. As you can see, the thing that we had before is no longer here. And what I want to start off with is creating long drawn out textures. So I'm just going to put this over here so that we have a neat little space that we can work in. And what we can do is we can set this to something like tones or textures mode over here so that we're using a granular algorithm. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to set the BPM all the way up, which you'll see just drags out the sample very far. As you can see, I can move it further and further. And this is the same as just holding shift and moving it like this, which is what I did before with the drum loop as well. You can just hold shift and make it as long as you want. And now you get cool stuff like this.
Don't stop it.
So you can hear we get that nice granular effect. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the grain size and the flux all the way up. This, as you can hear, has a drastic effect on the sounds. The grain size is basically for each little segment that we heard. How big is that segment? How many samples is that segment? And the flux is kind of how is it crossfading between those.
Don't stop.
So now we get something like that. And what I want to do is I want to make this a little bit more interesting by going into the envelopes over here. And now we can edit stuff like the grain size and the transposition here, which is just the pitch. So let's maybe draw in something like this. Have it go up a little bit, down a little bit. Just creating some crazy stuff over here. And then we'll go maybe like this again.
Don't stop.
And let's play with the grain size as well. Now this is a percentage of the value that you set over here. It works a little bit differently than all of the other envelopes. I don't know exactly why it's not just the grain size itself that you can modulate over here. But apparently this is just a percentage, as you can see, 100% over here. And just moving this up and down will also create some interesting effects. So let's do that as well. As you can see, I'm not going to go all the way to 0 because I don't want to have like a very short grain size.
Don't stop.
But you get some cool stuff like that. And what you can do is you could consolidate this with Ctrl J, and now you have a new audio file, and you can do the same thing all over again. Go back in here, the warping is already turned on. Let's in this case use the tones mode over here, which as you can see just has the grain size and does not have the flux. And we can make this longer. And we can do this whole step over again. Again, we have the grain size over here that we can change over time. Just kind of drawing in a quick shape going up and down. And I'll also do again the same with the transposition here. I won't go too extreme here. Okay, maybe I will. It's a little bit hard to show like that. Maybe if we open it up a bit more, it'll be a bit easier. Unfortunately, I don't think that I can zoom in here in terms of the scale of the transposition that we see here. But for now, this should be okay. As you can hear, we get some really cool effects out of that. Now, if you want to turn that into the stuff that we had over here, where we had that kind of like atmosphere stuff, all you really have to do is add some resonators to that. As you can see, we also have some EQ, saturation, and OTT to really bring out some of the frequencies. And then we have our final delay and reverb over here. So let's just quickly emulate that in this part over here. We're going to start with the resonators, and we'll set it to a key that we like, maybe like G sharp over here. I'm going to set up all of these over here. 12, 24. I go -12 maybe. And then let's go 7 to create some power chords. Let's set the dry wet all the way up. Let's lower the decay a bit. And let's listen to what that sounds like. Let's OTT this to make sure that we get a nice even volume. Let's have the EQ behind that actually, so that we can remove those lower frequencies again. We're going to add our delay here. And finally, to turn this into a real atmosphere or like a texture or something like that, let's use a reverb. In this case, I'm going to go with the cathedral, huge space over here. So this is like a really long reverb, as you can see, 4 seconds, a lot of late reflections, stuff like that. I'll set this to be maybe like far, and then we get something like this. In this other case, one of the interesting things that I did is that I had these 2 automations over here on the resonators, where it goes from 7 and 19 semitones to 1 higher. So here, as you can see, 8 and 20. That is just there to change the tone a little bit. To be honest, I'm not good at music theory, so I don't know how to explain this in music theory terms. It just sounds good doing it like this, so that's why I liked it. Next up, I want to show you a cool trick that I often like to use when it comes to my sound design as well. What I'm going to do is I'm just quickly going to create a new track, and I want to find some kind of complex drum loop. These are the vocals, but here we have some drums, maybe like some cinematic stuff. Something like that maybe. And what we can do is we can make use of the way that the beats mode works and the way that it likes to preserve transients. So let's set this to the beats mode over here. And what I'm just going to do is I'm just going to pitch it up in this default setting here. Let's go with like 3 octaves. instant glitchy textures. So you can consolidate this, and obviously it's going to be very high in terms of the octave right now, and then we can use something like the complex mode to tune it down again. Something like that maybe. And again, if you want a little bit extra tonality out of it, you can use something like a resonator. That's in this case, you use the spectral resonator over here. Let's again set this to the key of our track, which currently this isn't really a track, but you know what I mean. And once again, as you can hear, we have some really quick ways of creating cool textures. In this case, a little bit more of a glitchy texture. And with just a bunch of extra effects, we can create something that is really useful in our track. A few other things that you might want to do on this kind of stuff is add some extra glitch. So for example, let's add deep blue glitch on here. And let's add an OTT as well, again to even out the volumes. Let's add a EQ here to remove those lower frequencies that you probably don't want. And then finally, let's add some stereo interest by using maybe something like amp stereo spread. Or if you really want to make it interesting, what you could do is use deep blue glitch twice. So we'll just rack that, make another channel over here. And in this case, all we have to do is change the seed. If you're not familiar with this plugin and what the seed does, make sure that you go watch out my full guide on this plugin. Anyway, now we can pan one to the left and one to the right, and we get something cool like this. And as you can hear, we have some very interesting stuff made out of this drum loop. Now, as you can probably tell, the starting signal is very, very important when it comes to this kind of stuff. Especially if you're using it in a creative way to really mangle up some sounds, then it's really important to choose the right starting sample. That being said, often when it comes to this kind of stuff, it is not immediately obvious what the sample is going to do when it goes through a warp mode. Unless you're using something like the repitch, which just repitches the sound, which is a process that we should all be familiar with. The other warp modes, as I found, are always a little bit unpredictable in exactly how they're going to sound. So what that means, even when you're using the warp modes in just the normal sense, not even in the sound design sense, it means that you have to experiment with which warp mode is the best for you. You may find that a particular vocal doesn't really work well with the complex pro mode, and therefore you have to use maybe the texture mode or the tones mode or even the beats mode, for example. Or maybe you're very unlucky with the beats mode when you're aligning your drums and you actually like the sound of the complex or the complex pro mode even more. Also keep in mind that you often have these extra settings over here. As I said before, the complex pro mode allows you to change the formants, which you can see over here. This is actually if it keeps the formants or not, instead of moving them around with the pitch. And you have the envelope that also helps with the way that it kind of pitches around and stuff like that. And other warp modes are going to have different settings. This is how it's going to chop up the sound in the warp mode and how it's going to loop it, because the beats mode is essentially just looping the sound. You also have this over here, which is kind of like a sustain mode for the particular looping that you're doing. There's actually some really cool stuff that you can do with this before we use this for the glitchy stuff. But what we maybe can do is set it so that it loops forwards like this, and then we just set the sustain mode to like 50% or something like that. And I will just tune it up. In this case, let's set it to 16 notes. And as you can hear, we get a nice transgate effect right now. Of course, because we have the spectral resonator and all of the other stuff that we set up before, it is not going to be immediately obvious to what it's doing. So let me just quickly turn this off. As you can hear, this is a great way to make something like psychedelic particles. So I'm just going to move this onto a new audio track so that we can add some new effects to it without losing the other one. And what you can see is maybe just with like a ping pong delay or something like that. Unfortunately, you cannot automate this, but what you can do is record something in like over here. When recording in, I like to remove reverb and delay so that I can just put that on the recording later. Let me just get a little bit of like a count in time over here. And as you can hear, now I have something like this. And to think that all of that can just be made out of a drum loop, in my opinion, is very, very powerful. So that's everything that I wanted to talk about in today's video. I just kind of wanted to showcase the warp modes. I didn't really want to dive in too deep and show you too many examples and maybe even explain exactly what the algorithms are doing, even though that information is probably available somewhere and I could have made many, many more examples of different ways that you can use this. I just wanted to show you the basics and give you enough inspiration, hopefully, for you to start experimenting with it yourself. And hopefully you can come up with some cool sound design stuff. If you do find some interesting techniques or tricks, make sure to leave a comment down below with them. That way we can share them around and it's easier for everybody to kind of learn that way. But that's going to be it for the video today. I hope that you enjoyed it. Let me know if you did by leaving a like and make sure that you're subscribed. Another way that you can support the channel is by watching some more of my videos. So there will be 2 in the end cards. One is the last tutorial and the other one is a recommended video by YouTube. So just pick one and enjoy, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye bye.